The latest zombie apocalypse movie is coming. A sudden outbreak of zombie virus swept across the world. All newborns after the disaster are carriers of the virus. Only one boy has escaped unscathed. However, when his home, which he relies on for survival, is invaded by zombies, the boy must bravely face danger and search for hope to survive in the distance. Marco and his father rely on each other to live. In a forest far away from the noise of the world, they survive by hunting. At a young age, he learned to disassemble and assemble weapons with his father. His father is a taciturn man. Every day, besides hunting, he sets traps around the house. Marco, being so young, can't participate in these activities. Therefore, his childhood is quite dull. His father teaches Marco that a good hunter must remain silent in the forest, so that he can blend into the woods. This can protect us from outside harm. His father has a devout belief in the forces of nature, and left an M tattoo on Marco's wrist. The M stands for moss, mist, and magic. It represents that Marco belongs to this forest. However, Marco yearns to see the world beyond the woods, but his father always said he was still too weak. If he went out now, he wouldn't be able to survive. But one day, the leaf child would grow strong. The forest would set him free to find his own fairy. This fragmentary statement comes from a picture book called The Leaf Child.
Ушимната шума се грижи за мене. Често ми разкажува за самовилата, прекрасната самовила, која со својата магија дала живот во моите лиси.
The book also says that the fairy has long left the forest and moved to a distant and mysterious place called Stone Valley. Before the leaf child grows strong, he must stay in the forest to continue learning, because the magical forest can protect him from the evil winds. Marco couldn't defy his father's arrangements, yet at his age, he desperately craved friends and playmates. One day, Marco discovered an abandoned trailer deep in the woods. Through the window, he saw toys on the table, so he couldn't help but climb inside. As Marco happily fiddled with the toys, a figure emerged from the back of the trailer. Marco shrank into the corner, and the person in the dark slowly approached, who also looked like a young boy. He held a toy and tried to befriend Marco. Marco taught the boy how to listen to music. The two quickly became good friends. They exchanged names, and found that both of their names started with M. One was named Marco, and the other was named Miko. Miko seemed to have little contact with people, and his language ability had also deteriorated a bit. He could only spit out one word at a time, but this didn't prevent Marco from liking him. However, staying away from home too long would make his father angry. Marco took the toy Miko had given him, and prepared to leave. A woman with a gun gradually approached. Marco immediately sensed the danger, and hid in the nearby bushes. The woman obviously wouldn't shoot a child, and judging by her words, she should know that Marco and his father live in the woods. The woman was probably Miko's family. She tossed a bag of chestnuts to Marco, and hurried back to the trailer to hug her son. Marco watched the scene from the shadows. He was afraid to bring home the gift he received today, so Marco found a place to hide the toy. He returned only with the chestnuts and the water bottle. His father was very angry when he saw Marco and asked him where he had gone alone without fetching water from the stream, and where he had run off to alone. Marco trembled in fear. The chestnuts in his pocket fell to the ground. His father assumed he had just gone to collect chestnuts. He didn't pursue the earlier question any further. Marco remembered the embrace between the woman and Miko, so he mimicked their gesture, and stepped forward to give his father a hug. But his father stiffly pushed Marco away, and returned to chopping the pile of firewood. That night, Marco opened the picture book, and quietly drew his new friend inside. The next day, he took the opportunity to grab the toy while getting water. He continued to play with Miko. Miko's mother gave him a sense of love that was different from his father's. In fact, there was a photo of a woman in his father's workshop. One day, Marco finally mustered the courage to ask him about it. His father didn't answer Marco's question, but in the deep of night, he went alone to sit in the woods. He may have thought of his wife, because of his son's words. The next day, the father and son went hunting in the forest as usual. Suddenly, an explosion was heard not far away. Upon hearing this, the father immediately told his son to go home first. He then went over to check, holding his gun. Marco didn't obediently follow orders. He took a detour, and hid in the bushes to spy. Miko's mother was covered in blood, holding her arm. There were 2 or 3 bodies lying on the ground. The father approached Miko's mother with a gun, and without hesitation, shot her in the head. Marco was shocked, and quickly ran home. He lay in bed, his mind racing. As night deepened, his father finally returned. He mumbled incomprehensible words repeatedly, and also carelessly threw things around. Marco put on his headphones, and turned up the volume. He didn't want to hear his father's maddening voice. Unclear words mixed with the sound of falling objects kept entering Marco's ears. He curled up, waiting for his father to fall into a deep sleep. Marco slipped out of bed and opened the cabinet that his father always kept closed. He pulled out the tablet inside. Marco remembered that whenever his father was sad, he would take out this device to watch. It contained a video of the three of them playing on the lawn. The woman's belly was round, indicating that the family was about to welcome a new member. Then the image became blurry. The woman appeared very anxious. She called out Marco's name through the screen. The woman in the photo was named Irina, and she was Marco's mother. He got up and bound his sleeping father to a metal pipe. Then he packed his belongings. Before dawn, he left home alone. Marco went to the trailer to find Miko. He hurriedly stuffed many cans into his bag. Miko kept asking where his mother had gone. Marco lied that your mother went hunting. Then he took Miko's hand, and they ran away together. However, halfway there, Miko refused to move any further.
Mama. Не, веќе нема. Тато е лош. Ја претвори во земја.
The father woke up to find Marco missing. He removed the cuffs from the metal pipe. He noticed that all the pistols and picture books in the cabinet were missing. The father grabbed his hunting rifle and went outside. He followed the tracks on the ground to find the trailer. However, Marco and Miko had already left. Only a photo of Miko and his mother remained on the table. The father anxiously searched for Marco everywhere. The two children were progressing along the creek when they saw a strange person halfway through. They crouched down and hid in the bushes. Then they fled to a path at the edge of the woods. Not far away, there was an abandoned car. The two hurriedly climbed inside and shut the door. The next second, a group of zombies surrounded them and kept banging on the window. Miko was terrified by the noise. Marco could only cover his ears with his hands. Unexpectedly, in no time, the zombies fell to the ground and couldn't get up. The father forcefully yanked open the car door. He held a bloodied axe in his hand and pulled Marco out in one swift motion. He carefully checked his son for any injuries. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. The father glanced at Miko. He forcefully shut the car door. Then he pulled Marco away.
Ти си лош. И ти си кагонив. Ја уби мајка му на Мико.
Не е така. Ајде, мрде.
Ја уби и мајка ми.
Marco stubbornly refused to move forward. The father had to hide him beside a big tree. He took his gun and went back to rescue Miko. He was an excellent marksman, never missing a shot. As Marco was watching intently, he noticed a zombie approaching from behind him. He gripped the handgun, closed his eyes, and pulled the trigger. The father was startled by the gunshot. He was about to return to rescue them when he was tackled by a zombie on the roadside. Fortunately, the father reacted quickly and killed the zombie. By the time he returned to the scene, the zombie in black had already been shot dead by Marco. The father comforted his frightened son and said that the chubby boy was safe now. Let's hurry and leave this place, he urged. He noticed blood on his arm. The father's face showed shock and quickly took a few steps back. He cuffed himself to a nearby log. It was clear he was afraid of going insane if infected, which could lead him to harm his son. In addition, the father explained to Marco what had happened to Miko's mother. She had been infected by a zombie and was about to mutate. That's why I had to deal with her myself. Marco finally believed his father. The father longed to give his son a hug, but he would soon lose his sanity and become a beast that only knew how to hunt. The father pushed Marco away, urging him to leave quickly. Then he let out a terrifying howl. Marco watched his father convulsing and groaning, and could only cruelly leave the forest. He took Miko's hand and continued down the path. Soon, gunshots rang out behind them. Marco knew what that meant. He had lost his father forever on this day, and he had lost his shield of protection. The story of the Leaf Child was a doomsday fairy tale crafted by his father. It was a paradise that shielded him from harsh realities, but now the magical forest was losing its magic. The Leaf Child had to become strong.
Найди. Найди твоето самоубил.
Marco led Miko and set off again. Fortunately, they could still accompany each other, and wouldn't feel lonely being alone. Before long, the two finally reached the edge of the forest. A brand new and unknown adventure awaited them ahead. The two boys walked along the tracks. Pressing forward, they encountered a man listening to a radio.
И се јаде.
Никой. Каде сте тргнале?
Во каменната шума. Майка ми живее таму.
Uncle Hat spoke awkwardly. I could have gone with you, but I have little ones at home, and really can't leave. As he spoke, he gestured for them to go over and say hello. In a nearby cage, there were a few small zombies locked up. Originally, Uncle Hat couldn't bear to part with his infected family, so he kept them caged. He took out some food to treat Marco and Miko. Then he watched them leave. This peaceful and healing atmosphere didn't last long, before it was shattered. While the two searched for a place to spend the night, they discovered a large group of zombies. Fortunately, they were locked inside a train car, and couldn't get out. Marco hurriedly pulled Miko to escape, but as they turned, they were blocked by two armed men. Fortunately, they were just kids. The two men stuffed Marco and Miko into a vehicle, and took them back to a nearby refugee camp. The leader of the camp ordered that the two children be separated and detained.
Како ангел си. Ангелите не може да се заразат.
Why does the leader speak so perversely? Because after the outbreak of the doomsday virus, all newborns would be infected. Healthy children like Marco and Miko are rarer than gold. Especially Miko, who is considered a low-functioning child, represents purity and never growing up. The leader wanted to keep Miko as a spiritual totem in the refugee camp. As for Marco, keeping him would be a waste of resources. He ordered that Marco be dealt with tomorrow. A kind bearded man saw Marco alone outside, with the low-functioning child who wasn't even a relative. He genuinely admired the boy. So, before dawn, he called Marco to wake him up, and helped him escape through the back door.
Сакам да го земам Мико.
Marco didn't listen to the bearded man. He risked his life to sneak back into the base, and escape with Miko. The bearded man was shot by the leader for his negligence. Miko complained about being thirsty halfway through their escape. He was just like a toddler who couldn't take care of himself.
Трябваше да те оставам.
Marco made a tough statement, but he still had to find water. Marco entered a nearby abandoned building to look for any reusable resources. To his surprise, he actually found fresh water and some clothes left behind by refugees. Marco leaned over the balcony to gaze out and saw a zombie mother with two zombie children. It seemed like she was nursing the babies. He was curious about this scene when he suddenly heard Miko yelling. Originally, the leader of the refugee camp was chasing after them. The leader was furious because they had escaped. He drew his gun, ready to kill Miko first. Suddenly, a drone flew overhead. They immediately became alert and scanned their surroundings. However, in the next moment, gunfire erupted. Several of the henchmen around them were shot and fell to the ground. Two fully armed soldiers approached. They shot the leader of the refugee camp on the spot. Marco hid in the shadows and observed. Miko saw him and quietly shook his head, gesturing for Marco not to come closer, but he accidentally made a noise. One soldier walked towards Marco's hiding spot. Miko picked up the handgun from the ground.
Пау.
He sacrificed his own life to divert the soldier who was about to find Marco. The bearded man who fired his gun was stunned for a moment. He had never considered harming a child. He had acted purely out of instinct for self-preservation. The two soldiers left, dragging their helmets along. Marco felt heavy-hearted as he set off on his own. This time, he was truly all alone.
Зависи од оние кои ги сретнеш на твоето патување. Се уште го слушам гласот на тато. Ветрецот создава само луди чудовишта. Ветрецот мрази деца како мене. Сака да ме претвори во земја. Затоа што сум посебен.
Marco felt that he may not be able to find the Stone Valley. In anger, he tore apart the book The Leaf Child. He was filled with anger, and didn't know who to vent it on. Marco stood on the hillside, and gazed into the distance. A forest made of steel and concrete loomed ominously. He gathered his courage and entered the city. Outside the security bars were starving zombies. They moved in groups. Marco could only hide under a vehicle, and wait for the horde to pass. The next day, he found a hospital nearby. Inside, there wasn't a hint of life. Just as Marco was feeling lost, he suddenly saw a woman in a white dress, standing in a patient room. Could she be the legendary White Fairy? Marco took the woman's cold hand, and wearily leaned against her frail back. The woman grabbed Marco and bit him. She was no fairy at all. She was just a patient infected with the zombie virus. Marco quickly fled the corridor, and propped the hallway door shut with a stick. As he left, he touched the woman's hand through the glass. Marco was utterly exhausted. He longed to collapse into his mother's arms. Like any ordinary child in rest, Marco continued to wander the streets. He passed by a wall filled with missing person notices, and left his mother's photo on the wall. At this moment, a broadcast came from a nearby building. Marco followed the sound, and went inside to check it out. He found a holographic man speaking. He was talking grandly, in a language Marco couldn't understand. The loud volume agitated the surrounding zombies.
We must protect our children. This invasion.
The horde of zombies couldn't hold back, and surged towards Marco.
Я повикав моята самовила за последен път. Тато еднъж ми каже, ако я напущам шумата, там никога ще няма да ме напусти мене. И ти ми го покаже патът на моята самовила.
Marco prayed earnestly amid the music. Bullets whizzed past him. The surrounding zombies had all fallen. Marco took off his headphones. Everything fell silent. The red dot of a sniper rifle focused on the dinosaur t-shirt he had picked up. The fairy who saved Marco stood under the blinding sunlight. She looked warmer than the sunlight. The female lieutenant removed her face mask, and said, "You look just like my son, Philip." At her words, Marco clenched his hand, that had been bitten by a zombie. The lieutenant tightened her grip on her weapon. She had to act before the child turned into a zombie, but Marco suddenly stepped forward, and hugged the lieutenant. He wiped away her tears. In the end, the lieutenant couldn't bear it, and chose to lower her gun. She lifted Marco's bitten hand, and saw an M-shaped mark on it.
Я съм Марко. Ма, како Марко.
The female lieutenant shockingly removed her helmet, and told her subordinates that the child had a mark on him.
Ке видиш моята самовила.
Will you come with me, Marko?
Самовилата ми се насмивна. Дойди со мене, малечок. Веќе никогаш нема да бидеш сам. Моите лисија повторно станаа зелени.
The special mark on Marco's body was likely the reason why he, as a post-disaster newborn, didn't contract the virus. He was very likely one of the few people with antibodies. The film concludes with an open ending. Compared to traditional tense and thrilling zombie films, Beyond the Wasteland leans more towards an art film. In the original film, the existence of zombies isn't revealed at first. Instead, it portrays a tense relationship between a father and son living in seclusion in the mountains. It isn't until the boy witnesses his father commit murder that he decides to escape with his friends. They inadvertently encounter zombies along the way. The plot then gradually becomes clearer. It turns out that the father isn't a bad person, randomly killing his fellow humans. He is a protector who takes his son away from the virus. After the boy emerges from the forest symbolizing sanctuary, the second half of the story unfolds. After all, the protagonists are just two children, so there aren't any spectacular fight scenes. The entire film closely ties to the fairy tale The Leaf Child that Marco repeatedly mentions. It compares the tragic escape journey to the adventure of the Leaf Child searching for a fairy. It tells the story of the world after the disaster from a child's perspective. The slow pace may seem somewhat sluggish, but this style of presentation is also worth watching.